assume the worst in people. And I really think that in particular, when Delaney was talking about Christine Bunch, that speaker, she was charged with arson and charged with killing her child, and it was accidental, and she was charged with that because the district attorney thought that she was looking for a payout from her insurance company. And I think that also rings true in Just Mercy, the book. They talk about Herb Richardson and how even though he was guilty, you're taught to demonize and treat him as less than human. And so I think the lesson of this class is to really see the humanity in people who are put in hard situations. And I think that's really stuck with me. I now work for a public defender's office in New York City, and we represent our clients who are low income and facing their criminal appeals. And they have complex and challenging lives. And I think the lesson of this class and this book is to see the humanity in that. So I'm excited for this discussion, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sarah. How about Josh? I see you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Romero, and I'm a senior. And I took the death penalty class in the spring of last year. And I think in a lot of ways it was really formative for me because I think people hold opinions on the death penalty, but don't always know too much about it. They don't know the details. They don't know the facts. And Professor Baumgartner definitely presents the statistics to you, and they're objective, and it gives you a way to really get a grasp of this very complex and polarizing issue in an objective fashion. And I think the speaker series was definitely formative for me, having the opportunity to meet and hear from people like Christine Bunch, who many people who've already spoken have alluded to, as well as hearing from Henderson Hill, who was Curtis Flowers' attorney in a case that went to the Supreme Court that looked at the racially motivated use of peremptory strikes. That was one thing that was really interesting to me in terms of the speaker series. And in terms of topics, I really learned a lot about lethal injections during this class. And that was something that was really interesting to me because a lot of people view lethal injections as a humane form of execution. And it appears that, it makes the death penalty seem more humane. But when you really look into the botched executions of lethal injections, as well as the different drug protocols and the people who are actually performing the protocols for these executions, you really start to realize that, hey, there might be, it's definitely problematic. And, it's something that was really formative for me. And I hope we will get the chance to talk more about throughout this program. So I'm really excited to be here. And I love the book Just Mercy. So I think it's really profound. And thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Patrice.
Hi all, I'm Patrice. I'm from Washington, D.C. originally. I'm a current sophomore at UNC, and I took the death penalty class last spring, like a lot of the people here. And it's interesting that Josh touched on Henderson Hill. As he was saying, he was the attorney in the Curtis Flowers case. And that case actually recently resurfaced because the charges were dropped this summer after it had gone through 7 iterations of charging and recharging this man for a crime that they didn't have a lot of evidentiary support for. And that they were using, as Josh said, racially motivated preemptory strikes. So about, I think 3 weeks ago now, that case made it back into the news cycle. And that's what this class taught me. The death penalty isn't this isolated thing that's far away from how we live our life day to day. It isn't far from the public discourse. And I think this class opened my eyes to just how much the criminal justice system touches all of us, even if we don't really know about it. And it really made me more aware when I'm looking through news clippings, when I'm looking through sort of what people are talking about, how much this system sort of holds weight in our society and holds weight because it is, something that the state pays for, which means inherently this should be something we talk about a lot. There's so many conversations I've had because of this class So I'm really happy about that. And then one of those conversations that has been really wonderful, a person that called into our class was Lyle May, who is currently on North Carolina's death row. And unlike a lot of the speakers that we had, he's not an exonerated individual or someone pursuing exoneration. And that didn't make what he was saying any less impactful. If anything, it made it more impactful, and made us more aware of what Sarah was saying, like the humanity of everyone, regardless of their status of being on death row or not. And interestingly, this summer I was working on a project with Dr. Baumgartner on geriatric prison populations. And Lyle May was one of our co-authors, is one of our co-authors on that project. So there's a really incredible wealth of like humanity and just individuals who are currently on death row. And this class opened my eyes to just how many people are facing that sentence and are still people facing that sentence, regardless of how much the system wants to demonize them. So those were two things that really stuck out to me from this Poly 203 class.
Thanks, Patrice. Jackson Hill, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everybody. I'm Jackson. I graduated from UNC in fall of 2018. Now in my second year of law school at Vanderbilt. I took Poly 203 my freshman spring in 2016, so it was a little bit of a while ago for me. And I think we read Just Mercy this summer entering my freshman year also, and then read it again in the class. We read The Last Lawyer also, and both of those books really impacted me. The speaker series was also especially impactful. Anthony Ray Hinton was, I think, the first speaker, and he was just an incredible, incredible person. He was Walter McMillan's cellmate actually in Alabama. He was wrongly on death row for 28 years, I think, and got out in 2015. So Poly 203 kind of fundamentally altered my career path. I entered college pre-med like almost everybody, and then this class kind of just completely changed my perspective. So I ended up working as a research assistant for Dr. Baumgartner my junior and senior year, and then again, after graduating for a little bit, looking at the racial bias and traffic stop search rates and exonerations, and then also just executions and death sentences in North Carolina and nationwide. So last summer I did post-conviction death penalty work in California. I'm currently doing similar work in Texas while taking law school classes, doing the work remotely. And we just see every day the themes of the class and Bryan Stevenson's work. Like, we have innocent clients, or we have clients that are just there because of their race or the race of the victim or where the crime happened or when the crime happened. It's just all these factors that are not at all related to the severity of the crime. So just every single day, you just see the injustices of the system, and the class is especially relevant with so much of what's been going on this year, and William Barr executing 7 people in the last 2 months, and just the pandemic and horrible treatment of prisoners, like in California this summer. I think 12 of our clients on death row at San Quentin died from coronavirus, and just over a third of the population ended up having coronavirus, which touches on what Patrice was saying about geriatric prison populations. So it's just so impactful, and the class is so relevant to social issues. My brother is entering UNC as a freshman this year, and the one class I told him he had to take was Poly 203 with Dr. Baumgartner. So hopefully he will be able to do that next time. But I just want to say I'm also grateful to have the opportunity to take this class and just touch on how impactful it has been for me.
Thanks. Marley?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marley. I'm currently a junior at UNC, and I took Poly 203 in the spring, so again, cut short. But what really impacted me from the class, and Just Mercy as well, is that these basically heroes like Bryan Stevenson are doing the work that is so necessary and needed, but it feels like it can be so, I guess, swept under the rug. And so I met Ken Rose, who is a very significant or was a very significant lawyer in the North Carolina death row circles. And he did so much work to get people off death row and exonerated for crimes that they did not commit. And so to him, he's like a Bryan Stevenson to me. He's someone that is championing for these people that have no advocate, as someone was saying earlier, and just by their side. And it was just honestly incredible to hear from him. I actually got to go to dinner with him and a few other students and Professor Baumgartner through the class. And it was honestly just so impactful to hear directly from someone that is doing the work that is so needed and so necessary. And it really opened my eyes to that there's this whole line of work and whole group of people that is doing this important work. And it needs to be recognized even more. And so I'm so glad that Just Mercy has, impacted so many people. And I'm hoping that people like Bryan Stevenson and Ken Rose, can get the recognition that they need and the resources that they need to continue this work. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
Thanks. Savannah?
Hi. So I just want to start with thank you so much for having me. I think that for me, I originally came to Carolina wanting to gain the language to describe things that were already happening in my community. So I've already had friends and family members who had so many experiences with the criminal legal system in the United States. And while I did not have the opportunity to take the class on the death penalty, I did take a statistical research class with Dr. Baumgartner about the criminal legal system in the United States. And I think that, and I also had the opportunity to help plan the speaker series with Sarah and go to a few of them and also talk to David Boyce, who was wrongfully incarcerated. And he talked a lot about his experience being white and wrongfully incarcerated. And it made me think about the impact that these systems have, particularly on Black and Brown people, and how these systems are rooted in the oppression of Black people. And I think that that has really affected the trajectory of my life goals. It has made me want to continue in abolition work. And that's something that I'm very passionate about now. And I've used that as an opportunity to currently, I work at the Civil Rights Corps doing investigative work, which is a civil firm that focuses on suing prosecutors, cops, and jails across the country for their treatment of Black and Brown people. So I think that my two takeaways are that these systems are rooted in the oppression of Black people, and that abolition is necessary.
Okay, I hope that was helpful. That's a group of current and former students, and so I would love to open up to whatever questions people have, whether they be about Just Mercy as a book or piece of literature, or the broader questions that Just Mercy deals with. So, Justin, should we turn it back to you, and you can
Sure.
host
Yeah.
the questions?
Yeah. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for sharing a little bit more of kind of the core of this content, to who you are now and your experiences and impact. I'd like to welcome our participants here to think about any questions you may have from what you just heard, but I can understand why that might be a little intimidating, right? Like, wow, that's a lot of good experience folks have had. So I'm going to try to kick it off to get us thinking. Students just shared a little bit about maybe some names of people or cases or items that were really, really struck them or impactful to them. And for the students here, I would encourage you to consider expounding on why, right? So I'd open this up to you all and our participants here. What in the book, what are some of the cases or people or stories that were really memorable for you? What struck you? And maybe why?
Maybe I would encourage Jackson to talk about Ray Hinton, because Ray is someone who's in the book, and he was able to come to our class when he had just recently been released from death row after 28 years in Alabama. And Jackson, you were able to meet him. His fee went up. And so the next time I couldn't afford to bring him back. But anyway, we did get him here once.
That's sad. He's really an incredible person. Was a great speaker the year I took it. His case, I think, touched on a lot of what Savannah was taking, just what the system is designed to do and how the system is designed to oppress Black and Brown people, and how just evidentiary problems, and how often eyewitness testimony can be wrong, or how people are just looking for a scapegoat in a lot of these crimes. And when someone has died, historically a white woman has died, people will just point to a Black man, and that's just pretty much always going to lead to a death sentence. And I think just seeing Anthony Ray Hinton talk and the life he still had in him, despite being so wronged by the system and being so oppressed for so long, but just his the joy he still had and what he had to give, it was really inspirational. Just seeing someone whose case exhibits all the flaws in the criminal justice system, why everything needs to just be completely just torn down, to still have that life and so much to give to the world despite all that. So he was really incredible.
Hi, Dee. I think we can't hear you. I see you talking though. You might be on mute.
There you go. Thank you. I'm getting used to this. First of all, I want to thank you for this whole series. I think it was so well put together, the reading of the book, and then with the preceding lectures as we think through justice in those pieces of it. And one of the things I found so heartbreaking and eye-opening was the treatment of youth and the impact of youth being charged as adults. And I don't have my book right in front of me, but that heartbreaking story of the boy who shot his stepfather, and just the preceding days and the lifelong trauma that would come from that treatment was really mortifying. And looking at where we as the United States stand kind of in that journey compared to, the rest of the countries in the world in our treatment of youth. So that was exceedingly eye-opening to me. I don't know if anybody else had other reactions to that, or where we stand both in the treatment of youth and the treatment in what was brought up to the Supreme Court of how we treat our folks with intellectual and physical disabilities too.
Yeah, who would like to talk about that? I could give a little introduction. That one of the paradoxes of the death penalty seems to me that things that are supposed to be mitigators actually turn out to be aggravators, and sometimes the other way around. So when the crime is committed by someone who's 15, 16, 17 years old, one would think that, especially if you're a parent, that would act as a mitigator, that, the punishment might be reduced, as it is in most countries. But actually in our country, with the emotions associated with a capital trial, oftentimes those emotions seem to get the best of us, and we turn the person into some kind of animal. And that's easier to do if they have a mental illness or any kind of difference and a vulnerability. And so a young person or someone with a mental illness or someone with intellectual capacity issues are much more vulnerable, and so the system goes after them, and it's really quite shocking when you read about it. But what would some of the rest of you have to say about the issue of juvenile death sentences? It's currently unconstitutional, by the way, but it only since 2003, so it wasn't that long ago, and we did execute a number of people who were juveniles.
Yeah, I was going to build on that and say that my clients aren't facing capital charges in New York, but the charging guidelines that we work under, if our client was convicted under the age of 18, then those are grounds for higher sentencing levels on the part of the judge. And that's exactly what Dr. Baumgartner is talking about, things that are supposed to be mitigators, things that I think we all understand implicitly, that kids' brains haven't developed, that they're impulsive, that they make decisions that they shouldn't have. That's not really reflected in policy and in sentencing guidelines. And I think that has an enormous impact on these kids who end up going into systems that they're in for enormously long times, more so than most other people in other juveniles in the world. I think that there's some change happening around that. There was the ruling that kids can't be sentenced to die anymore. But I think that even now there's starting to be recognition that kids shouldn't be held with the same level of culpability as adults. And I did an internship at the Public Defender Service in DC, where we worked on laws that said that if you were charged as a juvenile and given a life sentence, that your charge should be overturned. And we argued based on the mitigation of those cases. And so I think there's some momentum in that. And there's a similar law in California, but it's based on old policy from the 90s about the super predators and the kids who didn't have any idea about morals or God's not true. They were just kids. That's my rant. I have other people have other thoughts. It's a problem, and I think you're.
So hi, my name is Janet Young, and my daughter Jada is a freshman at UNC. And you know, I'm a member of an organization called Jack and Jill, which Jack and Jill actually are moms, right, that are driven to lead their children and try to expose them to things that they haven't been exposed to in the past. And so one of the eye-opening things for me is just how the world views youth of color. They don't see youth of color the same way they see youth, maybe a white youth or someone even from another country. They just see our youth of color as not having the ability to be able to overcome whatever challenges. And so they don't really have hope. And another thing that is quite interesting is that when youth are in trouble, they don't have an advocate. The parents aren't able to advocate for them. And so they're often led into a guilty plea or something like that because they just want it to be over instead of really trying to develop a case for their kids. They lean on other people and they may be getting bad information from other people and they just don't know. So it's the ignorance of our ability to navigate through the justice system that, you know, our children depend on the parents to do that. When the parents fail at that, then they're very vulnerable to a lot of things that happen in this world. And so my heart really goes out. I was raised in the South and had, you know, parents that, you know, there were 10 of us. And it was just very, very hard to advocate on the behalf of every child. I was fortunate enough to have mentors in my life that was able to come in and kind of help expose me and kind of help grow me and really educate me on those things that could help protect me as a youth. But there are so many kids who don't have that. And so I think that a lot of things that we see is just a byproduct of just you not really having those resources for those children that are out there and they get in trouble and then they don't really have an advocate or someone there that can help them through that phase in their life.
Those are really good points about the issue of how society and especially the criminal justice system and police officers and attorneys and judges view children of color. It's almost like there's not the opportunity to be a kid, and things that would be explained away for a child of more privilege, or people take the blame for certain things that are normal adolescent behaviors, especially among boys. You know, who else wanted to say something? I see Savannah and Patrice nodding their heads, but you're not saying anything.
Oh, my bad. I think I just wanted to expand on that. And I really think there's so many systems that have to fail Black kids before they end up in the legal system. And I think that that just made me think about, I also grew up in rural North Carolina. So that's where I went to high school. And just even thinking about the school to prison pipeline and how it was ingrained in us in high school that if you got into a fight, you would be charged. And I went to a predominantly Black and brown school. And I think that it just speaks a lot to the fact that there are a lot of behaviors that Black children engage in that are the same as white children, but white children have the opportunity to continue to be kids, whereas Black children don't have that opportunity from a young age and aren't treated like that from their teachers and institutions. And I think that that's just something that's really sad. And yeah, that was something that it really made me think about. And then how a lot of parents don't have the resources. So a lot of parents don't have the ability because they're working or because they've had their own interactions with the criminal legal system to be able to sometimes provide their kids with information. So I'm specifically thinking about even our public defender system and how a lot of our public defenders are very much so overwhelmed because of the sheer volume of cases that they get. So a lot of people are funneled into taking plea deals instead of being able to advocate for themselves through trial, and how that ends up disproportionately affecting Black and brown people.
Yeah, and I just wanted to expand on that a little bit too. Your comments made me think of two very famous cases of Black and brown youth being indicted really before they ever made it into a courtroom, and that's the Scottsboro boys, as well as the Exonerated Five, formerly known as the Central Park Five. Both of these groups of Black boys were essentially seen as guilty from the moment that they got attached to the crime. And some of them did have parental support, some of them did have parental supervision, but the system was made for them to be beaten down immediately, and to be seen as criminal immediately. And so I think that's one part of all of this that's very disheartening and almost impossible to get your mind around, that innocence isn't what's prioritized. And like finding the actual guilty party isn't necessarily what's prioritized, but more so which story, which people can you point to immediately. And the fact that a lot of times the people you can point to are Black and brown. And that's what the public discourse will believe most easily. So I just wanted to bring up those two cases as well, if anyone hadn't explored them before.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that, because even in the case of like when people aren't innocent, when people are guilty of the crimes that they're charged with, there's so many systems that have to fail before someone ends up in that place. And I think that that just goes to show like how we value Black and brown people and how this country is built in the oppression and how we profit off of the oppression of Black people, because like there's no way that kids should be incarcerated. Like that just shouldn't happen. And I think that that just really speaks to like, I remember seeing a stat like almost 50% of like crimes are the direct result of poverty, and it's probably even higher where like poverty is a factor in the crimes. And I think that like there's just so many things that have to fail within our communities for that to be able to, or within the system for that to even be able to happen to Black and brown youth in the first place.
I think also a part of the problem is that if, unfortunately, if they are guilty, the justice system here is very punitive, not rehabilitative. So it becomes the problem just becomes a cycle, I think, unfortunately, instead of really learning, like in other countries where it is rehabilitative, here, because they get punitive, it just perpetuates the problem, I think.
Well, and a great example, I think in just recently in California, where they were having the wildfires, where they had prisoners who would go out and be trained to fight the wildfires. When they got out of prison, they couldn't get jobs as firemen or fire people because of their criminal record. And I think the governor just changed that. But I think that goes to not only, even if you do rehabilitation, you've got to have that flow through to them to be able to get a role in a job and with that training. So
that
Yeah,
makes me think of, oh, I'm sorry, Delaney, please.
I was just going to say when I think it was Christine Brunch and even Gary Griffin mentioned it when they did come out of prison. Some of these people went in the 70s. Like I wasn't born then. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have even. She was saying like the bathrooms, like drying your hands underneath those things. They're just skills that when they come out they don't have. So to be reintegrated into society, it just keeps perpetuating.
I could tell you that I had dinner the other day with this guy, Ronnie Long, and you could Google his name. He's a North Carolina case. He was exonerated about a month ago. He left prison about a month ago, and he went in 1976. And this was a case from around near the Charlotte area in a small town in Mecklenburg County. And he said, it turns out he's a smoker. So he knew that cigarettes were quite expensive. So he went to the store and he got a pack of cigarettes and he knew that was going to cost like $5 or something. So he had a $10 bill and he had heard about this new kind of ice cream called Haagen-Dazs. And he knew that he had seen like ads for it on TV while he had been in prison. And so he pulled out a $10 bill and got his pack of, I can't remember the menthol cigarettes he wanted. And then this Haagen-Dazs, he figured it might cost $1.50, maybe $2 maximum. And it was $8. And so he never got to have his Haagen-Dazs because he only had $10. So yeah, it's a time warp for a lot of these people.
So I know also, it starts with the school system as well, because our school system is punitive as well. They really don't know how to handle kids who are coming out of distressed homes, who may be exhibiting behaviors. And so they learn how the system deals with them very early on in the school system. And I think if we really want to impact our youth, we really should try to put more effort into our school systems that can bring about, just restorative justice, restoring that kid back instead of removing them from a classroom or sending them to a special school. How do we restore that kid? How do we reach them where they are now and restore that behavior now? I think it will help them as they turn into adults, and even as they, enter into teenage. is how that restorative action is exhibited in our, middle schools and our elementary schools, or even in our kindergarten schools. We have to start with that. We have to start having people reach those kids very early on in life so that they don't get caught up in the system.
And one thing to that point that I sort of think of when I heard that, one of our speakers said something that was profound, and I don't remember exactly who it was, but I remember them saying, like, how do we expect to like have a system where we rehabilitate people who haven't even been habilitated in the first place? They haven't had the resources in the first place to accustom them to feeling like they're a part of society, so they end up in the criminal justice system and in these institutions that not only perpetuate the problems they perpetuate the problems of being incarcerated and low income, and it sort of makes me think too, Janet, about your point with school systems. We live in a country where oftentimes your zip code determines the quality of education that you get, the resources that you have available to you, and how do we expect to really habilitate young people and keep them out of prisons, keep them, make them contributing, thoughtful members of society when we have systems that aren't even designed in the first place sometimes to even give them that right first shot, that first chance. So just a few comments on what you said and just what it made me think of.
I have a question. A few people have mentioned Ray Hinton and how he came out and was very joyful and has a lot to offer and give to people. But what about other people? Like, what resources do they need and what resources are available to them when they come out of jail?
I can kind of talk about it. I don't know a ton about what's available to them, but I know what isn't available to them. And I think in class, I think Christine Bunch was the speaker who had started her own organization to help newly exonerated people reacclimate and readjust and give them the tools and the skills necessary to come back out after, because especially after being wrongfully incarcerated, how do you come back to a life that you no longer know? And it feels like the state often says, all right, well, we messed up. Sorry, here you go. Here's your life back. And that's just not how it works. And so they need, like Professor Baumgartner was saying, so many things have changed since they've been in, even for just a year, that it can feel like a time warp and it can feel like everything is foreign. And yet there are so limited resources given to them to help them reacclimate. And I think that is a really big gap in the system, that how can we help these individuals readjust to a society that they either left on their own accord or because of a mistake in the criminal justice system.
I could tell you in direct response to your question, what's usually given to a person that's wrongfully incarcerated is a bus ticket, period. That's it. And there's no, and Marley said one thing that's not quite accurate, and I'm just going to call you out on this. They don't say sorry. They don't say I apologize. That's the one thing they don't say. And that's the one thing that people would like to hear, that some official member of the government take responsibility for the terrible mistake that was made against them. And usually that doesn't happen. It's very, very rare that there be any admission of responsibility. Occasionally, and this is always very newsworthy, when it happens, occasionally somebody sues the county or the police department or the municipality and receives a substantial settlement, in which case it's always in the news. But usually that's years after the fact, and it's not the typical outcome. So, and then tragically and ironically, if you're exonerated, you don't qualify for the housing programs and other kinds of training programs that guilty people qualify for, because you're not considered an ex-inmate. And so if you're one exonerated that we had in class one time said he went to the unemployment office to try to get unemployment and job training. And then they said, what were you guilty of? And he said, oh, well, I wasn't guilty. I've been exonerated. Here's my papers from the judge saying that I'm exonerated. And he said, oh, that's really strange. I'll have to ask my manager. And they came back from the manager's office and said, you know, we're really sorry, but if you're not guilty, you don't qualify to participate in this program. And so it's an incredible irony and tragedy. People need a lot. They need psychological help, and they need job training and, you know, material help. And typically they don't get it.
I think that was one of the questions in the study guides, right? Was looking up within your state, and I'm from out of state, I'm not from North Carolina, of what the reparations were for folks who were and how it varied by state. I found that to be very interesting.
Is your experience that the youth who are incarcerated wrongly and then are let out, does it usually, or more so now, are they coming back out still as young people, or is it still they're, you know, coming out as adults? I'm just asking because as you're talking about exonerated people coming out and not having resources, you know, I'm thinking about adults, but are there kids who end up accidentally, or not accidentally, but kids who end up, you know, in prison and then are coming out? Are they still kids? And if so, what kind of different resources do they need at that point?
The cases that make it through any kind of legal review that involving an actual finding of guilt and then a later finding, of innocence on appeal, typically those take so many years, if not decades, to go through that process that they're not children anymore. I think for a misdemeanor case, it's not uncommon that people plead guilty to things they didn't do. So they're, innocent, but they plead guilty perhaps, but they're not, those aren't exoneration cases. Oftentimes when there's low punishments for small crimes, it's a quicker way home to plead guilty and serve 5 days in jail than to try to contest the charges. And Sarah can talk about that a little bit. I'm sure you have a lot of experience with it in your office in the public defender in Brooklyn.
Yeah, no, I think that that's accurate. And there's a lot of incentive to take pleas. And we talked about this in the class, and there's a huge amount of attention comparatively given to harsher sentences and for higher level crimes, such as death eligible crimes and homicides and all these like class A felonies. But for the misdemeanors and the low level felonies, there's not a lot of attention or concern for all the people who are serving time for crimes that they didn't commit, for petty larceny or something like that. And that's an enormous problem too, that is going pretty, I think, undetected, because, you can kind of try and raise that on appeal if you want to. So like, what are you gonna do? And yeah, it's a quicker way home. And so a lot of kids take that, and then they have that record that follows them for their life. Or they don't want to be detained waiting for trial if they're in pretrial detention. And so they're like, I'll take 30 days so I don't have to wait 2 years to go to trial.
The one fun thing about this class is it's always an upper. Everybody always leaves class so happy. So I can tell I'm having the same impact on this group. But
that was actually part of my thought was, one of the things that I remember from Just Mercy, even from the beginning, is Bryan Stevenson talks about being proximate to the problem. And I would imagine it's hard to be proximate to a problem and feel super happy all the time. I know he was having some wins and continues to do some great work, but it doesn't come without being very close to very real problems. And it sounds to me like a lot of the current and former students have found themselves very proximate to the problems that we're discussing. And one of the big themes of the book, I think, is resistance and advocacy. So I'm curious if I'm a Carolina family member, if I'm a student, if I'm someone who might take your class, if I'm Joe Schmo, how do we find ourselves proximate to this problem if we don't have the experience of being in this class? What are some things you might say, hey, you, regular person, here's something you can think about or do to get closer to this and maybe be an advocate or resist?
I think several of students have been involved in the criminal justice awareness and action. So Savannah or Sarah, do you want to say something about that?
It's you.
Savannah?
I think Patrice was going to say something.
Oh.
What? So my name is Patrice again, and I'm actually one of the current co-chairs for criminal justice awareness and action, or action awareness. I always flip this. But I'm following in the footsteps of Savannah and Sarah, who were the wonderful co-chairs last year with my current co-chair, Sam. And essentially, we are a organization that focuses on prison abolition and do a series of sort of engagements with the community, as well as education work to make sure that that can be a goal that we really do work towards actively. So in the past, obviously a lot of this has changed due to COVID, but in the past we'd engaged in court watching alongside the ACLU. Excuse me, I believe I'm receiving a call. So sorry about that. So we engaged in court watching with the ACLU. We had a partnership with a Durham Youth Home, which was a detention facility for individuals who were under the age of 18 awaiting trial. And we built some really wonderful relationships there. We worked with this collective called the Prison Books Collective that delivered materials to individuals who are currently incarcerated all over the state of North Carolina. So essentially, I really want to give credit to Savannah and Sarah for this because they had so many things going on at the same time, and they were doing an incredible job of holding up all of these efforts to really engage with the community and do active work against the system of criminal injustice, right? Like that's one thing that we used to say a lot. And so the organization's still active to this day. It's modified in the way that it works. But if you have any current students who are interested in criminal justice work, I definitely direct them towards CJAA. We'd definitely love to have them. And I'll turn it over to Savannah and Sarah to see if I had any holes in what I was saying.
No, I think you were great. I also would like to add that, so even in the work that I'm doing now, like the organization that I work for have filed lawsuits across the country from the COVID response in jails and facilities. And one thing that I'm learning as our case is going through the courts is that courts are very conservative and they tend to follow the change, not lead the change. So I think that community organizing is the most important. So just knowing like who your DAs are and who your judges are, court watching, advocating, speaking to the people around you, like spreading awareness. Those are sometimes the best things that you can do because courts really don't lead the change. They tend to follow it. And sometimes it really is hard to find justice in the courts. And I'm gonna plug a way you can get involved.
Yeah, I think I would also just echo thinking about in your own communities on the reentry side, ensuring that the organizations that you're a part of, the shops that you go to, the places you frequent are like fair chance hirers and they're not looking at people's criminal records when they're trying to hire them so that people do get that equal opportunity to come back and reintegrate and have a second shot at life, regardless of whether they're innocent or guilty, right? Most people get out of prison and we want everyone to have a chance to have a shot. And like there are businesses in your community that can do that. And I think that if you own one or run one, you can think about doing that too. So Ban the Box would be a good one to think about with that.
I also think, like everyone has said, like knowing what's going on in your community, like within the Triangle area, there's so many organizations and people doing the hard work and that need support either financially or, you know, just they need people to help out with the work, which is really great. But I also think, you know, by just starting with Just Mercy and reading and educating yourselves about these things, it can be so impactful. And Professor Baumgartner, I know his speaker series with the classes, with Poly 203, the class he teaches is open to the public. So when that's taught, going to these speakers and hearing firsthand their accounts, I think being able to personalize the stories and having it come from a person and not just, oh, this is something I heard about, like seeing the person in front of you, it can be really impactful. So yeah, that's like a plug for the class, but I just think that the speaker series was really impactful.
I know what Justin was saying about how can the average Joe Schmo I think that it's important also to realize, not obviously all these organizations are absolutely amazing, but there are things that in our daily lives that everyone interacts with that are also like Ben and Jerry's. I think like educating yourself on the things that big organizations are doing, like everyone is impacted by. I feel like sometimes people, I know a lot of my friends who didn't take the class don't think that things that are happening in prison reform affect them. They think that it's, you know, things for lawyers, things for people of color, but really it's something that can affect everybody. There's how your ice cream was made down to things like that. Everyone really is affected by the things that happen in the criminal justice system.
And one initiative that I do want to mention really quickly that CJA actually engaged with recently is the Mississippi Freedom Letters campaign. If you have a couple of minutes, some stamps and everything, it's a campaign to really restore a vision of humanity for individuals who are incarcerated in Mississippi. And essentially you write a couple of letters to individuals who are incarcerated. And it's just a reminder that you stand in solidarity with these people. Like, I think one of the incredible parts of Just Mercy in this class is reminding us that these are actual human people with actual feelings that are going through this system. And that campaign's a really wonderful way to just remind yourself and them that you see them that way. So I'll drop the link in the chat of what that looks like.
Yeah, we did have a speaker from who had served time in Parchment Farm in Mississippi, which is their death row, and another who was supposed to come this year, but was canceled because of the COVID crisis, who had served in Angola prison in Louisiana. I went in as a 16-year-old for life without parole. And he was later exonerated, but both of those prisons are actually cotton plantations, and the farmers grow, the inmates work as farmers with manual tools and grow cotton in the Mississippi Delta, and it's quite shocking. And so they described some of their experiences in those prisons, which are really medieval.
We're coming up on our final 3 minutes. If folks have any kind of final thoughts or questions, there may be just a time for one or two. I want to let folks know that who participated today, but also for everyone who's not here, who hopefully read or participated in some way, I'm saving the chat so I can share these resources with you afterward. You'll also get an additional email. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. It's good stuff. Earlier, or excuse me, in a few days, that just kind of gives you some final thoughts, as well as shares a link to a documentary about about the Equal Justice Initiative that's free on HBO, so you get a chance to check that out. And then in a little over a week, you'll get kind of a survey to get your thoughts on how this experience went for you and what we might do in the future. With that said, I'll send out these additional things in the chat.
I wanted to show this book by Ray Hinton, in case people haven't read it. Ray is one of the characters in Just Mercy. He's not the main character, but he later was exonerated, and Bryan Stevenson was his attorney, and he's the one in the movie. If you've seen the movie, he's the one in the cell, or they interrupt him because he's having tea with the Queen of England in one of his dreams or daydreams. Anyway, he came out with this book a little while ago, and I would very strongly recommend it if you want a memoir of a person who's gone through what he went through.
Yeah, and the book I just put in the chat is the book that was assigned in our class, but it details the story of a man named Willie Grimes, who was exonerated, but he's from North Carolina and it occurred in North Carolina, and it details some of the really awesome work that was done in North Carolina and continues to be done by champions in the area. So.
I just want to say thank you guys so much. This was, really, really eye-opening. I'm still really processing a lot of what I read and what I've heard today, but really, really appreciate everybody's thoughts and time. And also it's very, inspiring to see so many of you who took the class going on to, do things and make a difference in school, but also in your you know, in your careers, those of you who've graduated. So, you know, that's really, while it's, you know, can be very depressing and upsetting at the same time, it's very inspiring to see the great work that you're doing. So thank you.
All right, it is 3 o'clock, and I am so grateful for Dr. Baumgartner and each and every one of these students here for sharing their time, preparing, and being here today. I'm blown away. So thank you for sharing your experience and being with these families. Families, thank you for being some of the folks to join today in the Zoom meeting. There are about 8 folks watching on Facebook who've been commenting as well. Thank you for taking a chance on this. Again, I'll be reaching out this upcoming week or so with some kind of final thoughts on the book, some more resources to engage with, as well as what was shared today. And then finally, I'd be curious where folks want to go with this. So please look out for that survey on what your experience was like. Hopefully folks who weren't here today can share a little bit about what prevented them from being here. I know all of our time is very short. We've all been impacted in so many ways by what's been going on in our world, that these small things can be sometimes difficult. But we'd love to continue to have you back if you've appreciated this opportunity. I know I have. Any final words? Again, that sounds really bad. Any final thoughts?
For me, thanks for having us. Thanks for organizing this. And thanks to all of you who showed some interest. And thanks to my students for coming.
Yes, thank you all. Be well. And for families, find us at families.unc.edu. Reach out to us at families@unc.edu if you have any questions about anything. We want to be your office on campus, so reach out. We're happy to help.
Thank you very much. This was awesome.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.